All right, team. We are talking about Congress politics and how a bill becomes law. This is actually going to be an in-class presentation. I am doing a run-through of the presentation. And while I'm doing so, I thought I'd record it. And hopefully this is useful, one, if you missed class, or two, if you felt like you wanted to review a component here. All right. Strap yourselves in. Some really important stuff, all right? Again, we talked about the structures with which we can exercise our power, and here we go, all right? A quick note before we talk about this, distinction between separation of powers and checks and balances, okay, and the relationship between these terms. Let's look at the first one first. That is the separation of powers. What do we mean by that? Our government has three branches. You no doubt knew this coming in. Legislative makes laws, okay? Executive carries out the laws, executes the laws, and judicial evaluates the laws, all right? So these are our three branches. Within the legislative, we have Congress, which we talked about. It's bicameral, that is two chambers or two houses. An upper house, the Senate, 100 people. Lower house, House of Representatives, 435 people. The Senate was what the New Jersey plan wanted, right? Equal membership per state of the union. House of Representatives is what Virginia wanted. You know, the bigger the states, the more the population, the more people represented, right? That's a big compromise there. Okay, that's Congress. When we talk about executive power, we're talking about the president, the vice president, and the cabinet, the appointees for the president that had numerous different divisions. And then finally, the judicial branch. This is the Supreme Court, as well as numerous other federal courts throughout the United States. How do they work together? That's separation of powers. What's the checks and balances? So we can see here with the arrows who's having the power here. Okay, so the legislative branch, for instance, makes bills. Oops. The president can veto those bills. And then throwing it back at you, the Congress can there's a path to actually override a presidential veto. All right, so there's a dialogue happen here. There's a nice checks and balances, and these happen within the other branches as well. President appoints judges. It doesn't mean that these judges will support the president's line. They may contest the president's line, right? So there's dialogues. Senate approves appointees. And then the courts can also determine that some of the laws are unconstitutional that the Congress passes. So it's not just that we have three branches, but there are systems of checks and balances that exist among them, which are really important to point out. Let's move on to Congress. And again, I am trying to go as quickly as possible with respect to this. Congress, again, we talked about the Senate and the House, the two houses of the chamber. The two chambers of the Congress. Who makes up Congress? 100 senators. There are 50 Republicans, there are 48 Democrats, and there are 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. And we're going to look at the word caucus, kind of like federal and federalism. There's a multiplicity of meanings for this word. And in this case, as a verb, it means they kind of vote alongside Democrats according to their party lines. Bernie Sanders is one of the independents. You've no doubt heard that name. But you're saying, hey, wait, I thought the Democrats held the Senate. And they do, all right? So it's 48 plus the 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats. So that makes it 50-50. The deciding vote in the Congress is the vice president. So Kamala Harris is our deciding vote, which means that the Democrats officially hold the Senate. All right. Here's the House of Representatives. Remember, 435 people. And I give you the numbers for both before our recent election and after the recent election. And you can see the Democrats actually had quite a wider majority before this last election. The Republicans gained many seats. You can see that they gained 16. They're plus 16, and the Democrats are down 10. So just establishing, I think, something that hasn't been discussed enough in the news, right? These were fair elections, right? If they were controlled by Democratic parties, you would not see this. The Republicans actually really did quite well in this election, save the for president. And then there was a subsequent runoff election in the Senate in which Democrats took those as well. But Republicans did quite well in this election, quite honestly. All right. So here it is. This is what we're looking like. So yes, the Democrats actually have clearly the executive power, the president and vice president. They have the Senate by the deciding vote of Kamala Harris, and they have the House. All right. This is our Senate leadership, what it looks like. And some of these names you've no doubt heard. Mitch McConnell, he is the Senate minority leader. The Senate majority leader is Chuck Schumer. So a few months ago, when the Republicans held the Senate, these roles were reversed. Chuck Schumer was the minority leader. Mitch McConnell was the majority leader. All right. These are important. The whips. All right. And a whip, the role of the whip is exactly what it sounds like. It is to kind of get the people in your party on the same page and kind of whip them in line, if you will. It doesn't necessarily mean whip in that case. That's not where we get the term. It's sort of an earlier term. I think it actually refers to a dog that maybe controls. I should have probably researched this before spewing it out, but perhaps a dog that sort of directs where the sheep or goats or whoever, where they should go. I don't know. Gosh, I hope I'm not I hope I didn't just make that up. Anyway, the whips. It is to understand and communicate the party lines to your party, all right? And that's going to come up as a really important feature later on. Dick Durbin, the Democratic whip, assistant leader of the Senate. I thought I'd throw that in as well. Patty Murray, Washington's own. All right. Here is what the leadership of the House looks like. You've no doubt heard the name Nancy Pelosi. Perhaps you've also heard Kevin McCarthy being the minority leader. And again, we have whips in the House as well. James Clyburn, South Carolina, and Steve Scalise of Louisiana. All right, important people. All these important people. All right, now let's get into the politics. That is sort of the people in Congress, sort of mapping them. What influences agendas and decisions of those politicians? All right, that's the politics piece. What are the influences? What goes into the decision of a politician? Their party, and we talked about it already with the whip, right? The whip communicates the party lines and wants people to fall in lines. We looked kind of, if I just back up for a second, and we've seen the numbers. They're pretty tight, particularly in Congress. So if you have even one Republican or one Democrat not fall according to party lines, it can make the break the ability of a bill to proceed. Okay. So these small margins make it really important for the whips to communicate party lines. Constituents, those are the people that vote for the people in office. They have accountability towards those people. Those are the people that elected them. I elected certain people, and if those people don't follow through on the sorts of things that they communicate, they go through, there are consequences for that, right? And we'll talk about those. Interests. What are the interests? And this is a loaded word, a packed loaded word, if you will, and you'll see what I mean by that. What are the interests? And generally, we're talking about money here. And then finally, caucuses. This is the noun, not the verb. And caucuses are these really, if the Senate and House had clubs, like a SAS club, the caucus could be, that kind of club. It's people, bipartisan, that is, includes people from both parties who connect and collaborate over shared interests. And I'll provide some examples later on. All right. So I really want to underscore the importance of the single story here. Not all Republicans think alike. Not all Democrats think alike. So what I hope to accomplish in this page is to give you some pretty broad things or leanings that different parties have, tendencies, all right? And again, it's so important to note that no two Democrats and Republicans they're not the same. They're individuals above all. That said, thinking about the whip again, there is an attempt to get some coherence, right? So what really emerges? Quote unquote conservative agendas that sort of attempt to reproduce the status quo and resist dramatic change. Smaller government, there's kind of a focus on this concept of freedoms and the belief that a smaller government provides greater freedom, including the freedom to pay lower taxes because there are fewer people in government. Traditional, quote unquote traditional family values, oftentimes in support of citizen populations, free market economies, that wonderful ability to make a lot of money or lose a lot of money. They're generally pro-life, and I would say generally, not exclusively. There are Republicans who are pro-choice, for instance. All right. Democrats. Quote-unquote liberal agendas, which generally advocate for change. Larger governments, a belief that these larger governments have a greater capacity to assist people who are historically left out of government structures. For instance, just some of the examples down here that fall outside what's quote-unquote traditional family structures, LGBTQIA+, dreamers, those individuals who live in the United States, pay taxes in the United States, participate in every aspect of this wonderful country without the status of citizenship. Those who are imprisoned, and this larger government and higher taxes subsidizes these populations that, again, are more marginalized. All right, environmental protections. So again, we're playing this idea of, some of your freedoms to drive that Hummer. Perhaps we need to reconsider those freedoms and drive something a little more sustainable, right? So you see how there are sacrifices of some individual freedoms on behalf of a larger group of people here for environmental protection. Pro-choice as well, being another typical agenda item among Democrats. All right, so again, I have to reiterate this. These are general broad categories that different parties lean toward. If you see an R or a D next to their names, you can't just take this list and assign it to those individuals. I just want to make sure I'm clear about that. All right. We talked about party. Let's go to constituents. Constituents politicians make political promises to constituents to become elected, right? This is Kim Schreier. She has an office not far from where I live. And she is a doctor. In fact, a doctor of was a doctor of some SAS students around there. He also works to defend Social Security and medical care. All right, so she actually has some clout there, being a doctor and then also running on this platform of Medicare. So, you know, if Kim Schreier fails on these, there are big consequences, right? Angry tweets among them, all right? Protests, maybe people showing up at their offices. I don't want to underestimate the importance of written letters as well. Of course, tweets are also really nice because it's like a public letter, right? It's targeted to an individual, and yet many people have access to it, right? And of course, the electronic platform allows it to be recycled and shared broadly and quickly. So there's definitely some value there. And ultimately, failed re-election. A potential consequence for not living up to what you say you're going to do for your constituents. So politicians face real problems if, for instance, the whip or the party line wants one direction, but your constituency might demand something different, right? There's conflict there. It's tough. This is the politics part. You know, what do you do? It's ambiguous. The government structures, government is really clear. It's very clear. The politicking and the politics and how an individual makes choices, it's muddy and tough. Right. So here, again, interests. Talking about money, all right? These PACs, political action committees, or super PACs for the really large ones, have interests. And in order to promote their interests, they give monies to politicians' campaigns in return for, this is monies with strings, in returns for them executing some of the things that these people want once they're elected. So different businesses, like Microsoft, gives a lot of money. Coca-Cola being another popular one, but businesses give money. Oil industry, another big one that we talk about. Labor, okay? It can be a labor organization like United Auto Workers. We are going to support you. And, you know, a lot of membership to this. So when the United Auto Workers put out a statement, we are supporting such and such a candidate, these labor organizations are really good at following through with the membership of these labor organizations. And it has power, right? Quantitative power piece. And again, these are the monies and also the votes that an individual gets. Again, it comes with strings. If you're elected, you had better take care of United Auto Workers or whoever it is. These can be in line with different ideologies. Like, for instance, we talked about pro-choice and pro-life. There are PACs for these as well. So if politicians, in order to get politicians elected, and if you are pro-life, for instance, these PACs are likely to give you big amounts of money. So you can already see where some of these problems could, where, you know, some problems that can emerge from this sort of relationship, right? With business interests, labor interests, ideological interests, informing politics decisions. So we are going to watch this really brief video by Alessandria Ocasio-Cortez that exposes really, and I think briefly, the problems with this.
Let's play a game. Let's play a lightning round game. I'm going to be the bad guy, which I'm sure half the room would agree with anyway. And I want to get away with as much bad things as possible, ideally to enrich myself and advance my interest, even if that means putting my interests ahead of the American people. So, if I want to run a campaign that is entirely funded by corporate political action committees, is there anything that legally prevents me from doing that?
No.
So let's say I'm a really, really bad guy, and let's say I have some skeletons in my closet that I need to cover up so that I can get elected. Mr. Smith, is it true that you wrote this article, this opinion piece for the Washington Post entitled, "These payments to women were unseemly, that doesn't mean they were illegal"?
Well, I can't see the piece, but I wrote a piece under that headline in the Post, so I assume that's right.
Okay, great. So, green light for hush money. I can do all sorts of terrible things. It's totally legal right now for me to pay people off. So, I use my special interest dark money funded campaign to pay off folks that I need to pay off and get elected. So, now I'm elected, now I'm in. I've got the power to draft, lobby, and shape the laws that govern the United States of America. Are there any limits on the laws that I can write or influence?
There's no limit.
So there's none. So I can be totally funded by oil and gas. I can be totally funded by Big Pharma, come in, write Big Pharma laws, and there's no limits to that whatsoever.
That's right.
The last thing I want to do is get rich with as little work possible. That's really what I'm trying to do as the bad guy, right? So is there anything preventing me from holding stocks, say, in an oil or gas company, and then writing laws to deregulate that industry and cause, that could potentially cause the stock value to soar and accrue a lot of money in that time?
You could do that.
So I could do that. I could do that now with the way our current laws are set up. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is it possible that any elements of this story apply to our current government and our current public servants right now?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have a system that is fundamentally broken. We have these influences existing in this body, which means that these influences are here in this committee shaping the questions that are being asked of you all right now. Would you say that that's correct,
Yes.
Mr. Marabani or Mr. Schaub?
Yes. In terms of laws that apply to the president, yeah, there's just almost no laws at all that apply to the president.
So I'm being held, and every person in this body is being held to a higher ethical standard than the President of the United States.
That's right, because there are some ethics committee rules that apply to you.
And it's already super legal, as we've seen, for me to be a pretty bad guy. So it's even easier for the President of the United States to be one, I would assume.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Called dark money for a reason. Definitely hides in the darkness. All right. Which is why I haven't taken a dime from any PAC, as Bernie said numerous times. There's definitely bragging rights in that. I mean, truly. All right, caucuses. So these caucuses I mentioned already, kind of like SAS clubs, right? A lot of political clout here in these caucuses. This is really, I think, an exciting opportunity for bipartisan, that is, agreement among independents, Republicans, Democrats, everyone. Sort of shared. It could be an identity, it could be an issue that's of interest, but some sort of a place for collaboration around shared issues, or, again, ways in which you intersect with other people in Congress. And it's not dictated by party. These are bipartisan. Animal protections is an example. Children's health care, another example. There are so many of these. Black Caucus. Taiwan relations. Okay. Autism. There are so many, so many. Use of opioids, right? Opioid death concerns, and drugs in general. There's all sorts of opportunities for bipartisan collaboration here, with the hopes that sort of these think tanks and opportunities to gather and talk about issues can develop into positive change, such as a law. All right. So, again, compelling spaces to foster bipartisan dialogue, caucuses. Not talked about much, but I think as we talk about agreement as opposed to division, caucuses, again, a really exciting place for these conversations to happen. All right. Hard shift gear to how a bill becomes law. We understand the structures of government and Congress in particular. How a bill becomes a law, we're talking about Congress specifically. That's what they do. They make laws. They're also susceptible to politics. And that's the other part of this sort of first part of this presentation we talked about. Politics can interfere with the passage of legislation. It's hard, even at the individual level, to try to be party line, to advance the interests of your constituency, to kind of do right with those people who have given you monies. It's hard to accomplish all even at an individual level. And here we have 435 representatives, 100 senators, right? 535 people trying to collaborate in the passage of a law. Tough stuff. All right, how does it work? So every bill starts with a problem and an idea. And, we can even back this up and look at the framework that we've been talking about up to this point, which is sort of a principle. Your values allow you to really see these problems, right? So based on your passions, your principles, identifying a problem, and then generating an idea. How can you solve it? That's obviously the harder part. Seeing problems in the world today is sadly not a difficult task. The bill is introduced usually to the House. Why to the House? Bills that require funding, and most of them do, need to start in the House, not the Senate. The bill goes to committee, all sorts of committees, all right? Congress, the House, and generally the House first, debates and votes. If it passes, the Senate will do the same thing. And then finally, presidential action. The president can either sign the bill into law or veto it. That's not the end of the bill, however, and we'll talk about that later. All right. Setting the context, economic crisis, 2008, a war in Afghanistan going on, which looks like we are toward the end of, praise the Lord. We lost our Sonics in 2008. All right, well, what else happened in 2008? President Barack Obama, first year of his first term. Every law starts again with a problem and an idea. Well, what's the problem here? Too many people living with limited access and poor quality health care. Two problems there, right? Accessibility and quality. 50.7 million people are with no insurance at all in the United States. These are huge problems. More problems. Government-run healthcare requires high taxes. Insurance companies are operating without rules. All right, here are problems. And you can already see some of the elements that could be challenging for a Republican, for instance. Higher taxes, right? Generally not in alignment with that, which sort of might, which is viewed as sort of an infringement of a liberty. The idea that you have to pay a tax and pay it on behalf of people who are uninsured. Perhaps not really considering that's not your problem, right? Or insurance companies. These are private enterprises, and they should have the rights to make a lot of money, all right? These are the problems. Okay, so this is the idea. Expand and improve healthcare. So greater accessibility, greater quality. Attempting to curb spending through regulations and taxes. All right, here's the former Speaker of the House, who's now also again the current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, brought the bill to the House floor, being the Speaker, and unveiled a 1,000-page healthcare plan. It's given a name, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, sometimes called the PPACA, sometimes called ACA, sometimes just called Obamacare. It is assigned a number H.R. 3590, and it is now sent to committees. When I take it to the floor, it will win. This will happen. You lie. All right. Some spirited dialogue. Okay, the bill goes to committees, and the speaker refers it to the appropriate committee. In this case, committees. All right, this is a complex bill. 16 different committees. Oh my Lord. So committee work leads to debate and amendment of the bill. Okay, and these are bipartisan committees. All right, these are both Democrats and Republicans, and each committee is trying to hammer out different versions of this bill. And ultimately, there'll have to be some coherence of this bill moving forward, right? You just can't have different committees with different bills. So once it gets then to the House, you need to sort of make sure everyone's on board with a singular version of all those amendments. The majority will vote to approve or deny the bill. If it passes, it goes to the other house, in this case, the Senate. And you repeat the steps of sending it to committees and debate and amendment. All right? So, very likely, what you get then is a couple different iterations of the bill, one that the Senate approves and one that the House approves. And I'll get to that in a moment. So, understandably, this is where most bills die. Sorry, William. It's the reality of it. The journey of a bill from idea to law is arduous. All right. So if two houses, Senate and the House, have different versions of the bill, it will then go to a joint conference committee, and they will arrive at agreement. And once again, and then it goes back to the House and Senate. All right. So the joint committee will hammer out a singular bill, and that singular bill will go back to the House, and it will go back to the Senate, and they will vote to pass, or maybe amend, or maybe it just sits and dies, like William. And again, majority votes are required to either approve or deny the bill. Ultimately, the House approves 220 to 215 on November 7th. The Senate would go on to approve 60 to 39 on December 24th, Christmas Eve. All right. The president may approve or veto the bill. Clearly, in this case, the president is approving the bill, right? If the president decided to do neither, the bill would become a law in 10 days. If the president were to veto, it's not the end of the bill. It goes back to Congress for a final vote. And what you need is not a majority this time, but a 2/3 majority. So the stakes are raised. On the one hand, a veto isn't a death sentence. But on the other hand, you need to, if the margins were tight, come up with those extra votes, right? And here we have our president signing the ACA with probably 85 different pens to give to children and other people. All right, there you have it. I think we are done. All right, thank you, team.